Ladies and gentlemen, faculty and students, may I say that having read Adam Zamoyski's remarkable work on the history of Poland, it is a pleasure for me to have visited in Warsaw yesterday the palace, to be made aware of the history of the Jagiellonian dynasty, and now to be here at the Jagiellonian University in Krakow, which is a crossroads of history, tradition, and modernity as represented by this new campus of the university. Arriving on Sunday, I believe it was, in Warsaw, I have been humbled by the spirit of friendship and warmth with which I've been met here in Poland. And we look to you as a region in transition, in transformation, a region which 2 decades ago was in a position of expressing a hope about the legacy to the future, not only about the legacy of the past, where the comments and I remember distinctly in 2001 visiting Krakow and looking at the legacy of to the future in the context of my then role as moderator of the World Conference for Religions and Peace. I had to work with 9 faith groups all over the world, and I went from here to Oswiecim, rather surprisingly, because people were saying, what is he doing there? Because of the stereotype that all Arabs are Muslim and all Muslims are terrorists. You see, I am a Muslim, but I hope I don't terrorize you too much today. But I was happy to be able to triangulate the relationship between Catholics, Jews, and Muslims. I was happy to be able to contribute. I don't think I need that, thank you. It's like something I would wipe my grandchildren's bottom with, maybe. But I was happy to and gratified to be told by the Jews, thank you for coming because you have commented on genocide in the Balkans, and by the Christians, thank you for participating in a sharing of values. You mentioned, my dear host, values a minute ago. And speaking of values, I believe there's a Polish saying that there's certainly nothing like visiting a place to learn about it. At the same time, however, and especially with regard to academic exchange, there is nothing passive about receiving a visitor. So I hope there are questions and answers, that you are not passive in receiving a visitor. Both, in a way, the visitor and the host are traveling together and learning from each other interactively. It is my hope that some of your faculty and students can visit Jordan as we structure our relationship between Jagiellonian and Jordanian. Both start with J. That's a good beginning, I suppose. And it is my hope also that our interest in Polish history is not, at least from our side, at the southern end of the Volga through the Black Sea to the West Asian region, not one devoid of history, because after all, trade up the Volga has been a feature of the route of ideas, as I would like to call it, from the days of the Byzantines through the Ottoman period. To us, in our part of the world, you are Lekhistan. To you, we are Arabistan. The only point of difference is that Lekhistan has emerged as Poland, and Arabistan is still being fragmented. Today, we have the possibility of 2 Libyas, we have 3 Iraqs, we have the possibility of 2 Yemens, and so it continues. Arabs are not expected to live together, but more of that later. As a member of the region's intellectual forum, the Arab Thought Forum, I realized that the Arab League is in a state of disrepair. I'm being diplomatically polite. I'm going to leave my text with the International Relations Department to publish in a readable manner, but I think that having kept you waiting, even though it was because of the rector, I owe you a little bit more than a written text. The context. What is the context? West Asia, North Africa is the context, because when you say Middle East, I asked Senators Lugar and Biden some years ago, who were at the podium there in the Center for Foreign Relations. You know, in the United States, the Senate Foreign Relations Committee receives foreign guests. And in the Congress, it's the Foreign Affairs Committee. You know why they have foreign relations in the Senate and foreign affairs in Congress? They say because senators are too old to have affairs. But anyway, regardless, I plow on to say that what was important to me is when I asked Biden and Lugar, what is the Middle East? The answers came back along the lines of from Marrakesh to Bangladesh, from Casablanca to Calcutta. And I thought, my goodness, this is a very surreal interpretation of what is the Middle East. As though the middle of the world really doesn't matter. I mean, say whatever you like about it. Really, the Middle East, to us, cynically, is two words: oil and terror. The oil produces the purchasing power for the weapons, and the weapons are used on all sides to terrorize the peoples of the region. And therefore, we thought in the region, and I say we, I wear two hats. I wear a hat which is Turkish, Iranian, Arab, Pakistani, Indian, but at the same time, having studied Hebrew at university, I believe in the importance of maintaining conversations with those who are interested in a conversation in the Jewish world. I believe in promoting the noble art of conversation. And I believe that Islam recognizes the importance of the legacy of all the prophets of Judaism, of Christianity, and indeed Islam in a sense is a continuity of the traditions of those who have lived before us and even before the monotheistic faith. It is for that reason that we thought it is time to remind you that West Asia is a place that not only faces so many challenges beyond Iraq, Afghanistan, Egypt, Libya, and Tunis, and even beyond Palestine, but it is also a place where we can develop a framework to better represent one another. One of the key and most simple purposes of the West Asia, North Africa region is to emphasize the intra-independency of West Asia and North Africa. Intra-independent. What do I mean by intra-independent? Luxembourg is intra-independent. Tiny Belgium, tinier Luxembourg, and larger Holland. You recognize my identity, I recognize yours. Interdependence to me means taking crumbs from the table of the other, but intra-independence means complementing each other while recognizing richness in our difference, in our diversity. And I would like to suggest that the extent, geographically, that this region represents energy and water resources should be kept in mind. The West Asia, North Africa region represents something like 70% of the world's oil and 40% of the world's gas. If you extend it further toward the Central Asian republics, and I would like to remind you that your own country hosts the East-West Center, which I visited in Warsaw yesterday, then we include the Balkans, the Central Asian republics, and the Caucasus, and in effect we're talking about the main seismic line, if you will, political, economic, and geographic, and social, between Asia, west of the Urals, and Europe. Of course, east-west, from a Polish point of view, is the very near east. That is to say, all the way to the Urals. But the east I'm talking about is all the way to China, ASEAN, South Korea, Japan, and how we can, in our region, complement the spaghetti junction of pipelines moving from East Asia across Europe, currently through Turkey and through Russia. But what is important, ladies and gentlemen, is not the pipelines. What is important is the people living next to the pipelines. In our region, we need 100 million job opportunities, we are told, by the year 2020, and we are told that by the World Bank. And I'd just like you to know that in terms of water, we are water-scarce countries. The Jordan River is one of the most complex and contested waterways in the world. It has 4 riparian parties: Lebanon, Syria, and Palestine. And West Asia is one of the most water-poor places on Earth. My colleagues in the Strategic Foresight Group in Mumbai, in India, I am turning to the wisdom of Asia now, old and new, estimate that by 2025, 300 million people in the Arab world will be living under conditions of what the United Nations defines as an absolute water scarcity, with about 500 cubic meters of water per person per year. 500 cubic meters of water per person per year. To put this in perspective, the United States currently uses close to 70,000 cubic meters of water per person per year. At the same time, a global energy and water belt extends through the Central Asian republics, as I mentioned, down the Volga, through Turkey to the Strait of Hormuz. Please bear in mind that you are not so far away from us at all. These axes cannot be protected solely by military forces guarding the ports of the Persian Gulf or focusing missile defense against incoming missiles from whichever party it may be. I know what it is for countries to have been occupied. I know what it is to emphasize in the 3 baskets of security of the Helsinki process only weapons of mass destruction. 4 of them, if you'd like to be reminded, or maybe even 5 now. Biological, chemical, nuclear, but also radiological and cyber. We are in the middle of the melting pot of all the new technologies. We are the laboratory for weapons of mass destruction. When I speak to an Israeli and he says, well, we are afraid of an attack by Iran, we can never have comprehensive peace with the Arabs. And I say, look, an attack by Iran or anyone else against Israel is going to obliterate me and my family and my country as we speak. So thank you for making this point. But I want to ask, is it for you or for me to move back the goalposts and to say Iran is a threat today, Pakistan is a threat tomorrow, India is a threat the day after that, Islam is a threat, this one is a threat, that one is a threat? Why is it that we cannot have an organization of security and cooperation for all the region to define the real and perceived threats? Another threat is current security, criminality, and terror. I think that it is extremely important to identify a 3rd aspect of security, and that is human dignity. It is more important, in my opinion, to close the human dignity deficit than it is to talk only about closing the budget deficit. We are all competing for the same resources. These resources are running out, and this has become a cliché. And this is why we have called for the establishment, rather like the Europeans started with coal and steel, of a community for water and energy for the human environment. If you recall, Schuman and Monnet in 1950 called for just that in the context of Europe. To put it bluntly, WANA is about reorganizing our priorities, recognizing our problems, and recognizing that they do not all fit nicely into the map. But who cares? Why am I discussing geopolitics when people are getting shot at every day? And two regimes have been toppled, as Ben Ali in Tunis and Hosni Mubarak in Egypt have shape-shifted from leaders to autocrats to dictators before foreign eyes. And the supposedly passive Arabia has expressed itself in clear and, for some, surprisingly modern terms. For two reasons. The first is that the problems of the Wana region have not gone away with Mubarak and Ibn Ali, and nor will they go away with Gaddafi, or to some extent, even peace in Palestine. We have lived all our lives with two elephants in the room. We cannot talk about stability, education, improving the quality of life, because we have to be on a no war, no peace footing with Israel. And of course, the Israelis see it that way too. They can't lighten their hand to invite ethnic conflict, God forbid, between the Jewishness of the state or the Christian Palestinian identity or the Muslim Palestinian identity, the Ashkenazi identity, the Sephardi identity. They are continuously warning of the external enemy. If peace were to come to the region, surely Israel also would be facing some of the difficulties that Arab countries have faced and are facing, particularly in the last few weeks. How do we move away from the situation of crisis? By dealing with our problems in terms of oil and Palestine as significant, but not only the only challenges that our peoples face. Of course, the optimism currently born in the region derives from the fact that normal men and women and the representatives they elect can start to address these problems themselves. But will they be given a chance, given the presence of Palestine and its overwhelming significance and the importance of the export of oil? Quite honestly, we feel there are four important countries in this region: Turkey, Israel, Iran, and the United States. And Arabs more and more on a daily basis, particularly Palestinians and Lebanese, those who are caught in the middle, and Jordanians for that matter, feel that we are hell's firewood. If a new, or should I say newfound spirit has come to the Arab world in the last few weeks, it will require not just the forbearance of Europe, but its understanding. On the 1st of July 2011, Poland will hold the presidency in the Council of the European Union. This country taught the European Union to engage with Eastern Europe. Can you contribute to convince the European Union to engage with the rest of the world? Your neighbors, to start with. The results for you of engaging with the rest of Europe have been staggering. Perhaps during the presidency, Poland could help Europe to look even further east by formally recognizing the West Asia, North Africa reality, and by helping us to create initiatives to build on our resourcefulness and not just on our resources. The failure to achieve peace has held an entire region hostage. It affects every issue in the region. And as I have mentioned, my suggestion, having addressed the two elephants in the room, the first, the instability of oil, which has been a persistent problem, and the second, the Arab-Israeli conflict, my suggestion is, in some quarters anyway, that the new wave we are currently seeing in the region could give rise to the Islamists and the Muslim Brotherhood? Perhaps. But from my reading, the Muslim Brotherhood has been extremely pragmatic during this period of time. History suggests to all of us that democracy is self-regulating, provided it is inclusionist. You can't say, I want to hold free and fair elections and exclude as a bloc a grouping of people because they espouse certain views. However, those who link these views to extremism and talk of instability often do so for their own purposes. The conflict between the mercenary companies and the bin Ladens of this world, this conflict is a conflict of opposites, or indeed, are they opposites? At the end of the day, it is a conflict of those who want to kill moderation and centrism. No amount of polling, or what one article in The Nation referred to as the ideological archipelago of faux expertise, could have predicted that the recent uprisings would have been led not by charismatic leaders, politicians, intellectuals, or the West, but, ladies and gentlemen, by Arab young men and women. A narrative of extremism, an associative network of subliminal messages revolving around violence, rage, and bigotry has been shattered. Maybe after the 25th of January, we can regard ourselves no longer and our youth no longer as surplus humanity. Some sections of the media still haven't gotten it quite right. The prospect of using Facebook and Twitter instead of throwing stones seems to have befuddled mercy and befuddled us all. If you just stop moving just for 1 second, I might be able to focus a little better. As for Muslims, yes, they believe in the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. But they also believe in the right to raise a family. They believe in the pursuit of happiness. The two are not and have not ever been mutually exclusive. And yet we still see, some of us will still see West Asia, North Africa as a threatening place, a breeding ground for the uncritical acceptance of intolerant ideas. They forget that theocratic and autocratic policies moved in when oil prices fell and economic growth faltered in the 1980s. That was when many of our intellectuals moved out, our Arab intellectuals. The poet Nizar Qabbani to London, the celebrated writer and critic Adonis to Paris, the Egyptian philosopher Nasr Hamid Abu Zaid to the Netherlands, and many, many more. Stifled from within, those who dared to think did so from without. Over the past decades, it was from France that the Algerian Islamists wanted to wage their campaign against the regime of the military and the ruling party. It was from Jersey City and Manhattan that the blind preacher Omar Abdul Rahman and the band of young followers attempted to unseat Hosni Mubarak. And it was from London, by fax, that Muhammad al-Mas'ari, a German-trained Saudi dissident with an American wife, plotted against the House of Al Saud. And yet, as so many have noted, the recent uprisings in the region came from within, from a silenced majority. As you know, in the words of Homer, the silent majority is the dead. But the silenced majority, aged between 15 to 29 years old, such individuals make up more than a third of Ghana's total population. I am not going to pretend to talk on their behalf. I'm well over the age of 29. Although once upon a time I stood on the bridge in 68, in 68, in Paris, and had that same feeling of enthusiasm, that a vacuum was being filled by hope of young people. Between the 13th and the 15th of December 2010, I'd just like to comment on the conversations that have been taking place during this period. The Arab Thought Forum, of which I am chairman, together with the Alexandria Library, of which I'm a member of the board, convened the youth conference in Egypt. We were coming to the conclusion that the frustrations faced by young men and women throughout the West Asia, North Africa region had created this vacuum of hope, and it became clear that the implications of this were complex. What we failed to realize was that they were to play out before our eyes quite so soon. 2 days after the end of the Alexandria conference, a 26-year-old called Mohammed Bouazizi immolated himself, set fire to himself outside the governor's office in Sidi Bouzid in Tunisia. He couldn't find a job, so he sold fruit and vegetables in the city square, only to have that lifeline taken away when a municipal official discovered he had no permit. He died in hospital on January the 4th, the unassuming lightning rod of the Jasmine Revolution. The World Bank, as I have told you, estimates enormous figures of unemployed. But is the World Bank, is the Monetary Fund more concerned with the future of our people than we in the region are and should be? 11 days after President Ben Ali fled Tunis for Paris, and 21 days after the death of Bouazizi, Egypt would begin the 18-day process of toppling a 30-year regime. A yearning for human dignity in Tunisia became a call for self-determination in a historic center of the Arab world. I have believed in self-determination since the Arab Renaissance movement of 1918. What did my great-grandfather, Al-Hussein ibn Ali, call for? Self-determination for the Arab peoples, and no to exporting oil to the Anglo-American companies before this self-determination was respected. He ended his days in exile. To me, a man of principle. The voices from Tahrir Square may have lacked the finesse of the American president's words when he spoke in Cairo. Mr. Obama is a great orator, we all know, and spoke in Istanbul before that. But 2 years earlier in Cairo, he spoke of new beginnings for the Arabs, from Washington speaking into the region. Today, voices from the street are speaking about the future of Arabs, by Arabs, for Arabs. And yet, when you jump for joy, as your own poet Stanislav Lech, my pronunciation is bad, Lechistan, as your own Stanislav Lech says, when you jump for joy, beware that no one moves the ground from beneath your feet. Fact is that the future of our young people remains in the balance. In many ways, they face the same problems young people everywhere face. Being misunderstood, having to forge a career, or one day provide for a family. But the similarities, for the most part, end there. Between 2001 and 2003, the West Asia North Africa region has spent over $8 trillion on arms purchases, with spending expected to double over the next decade. The Prime Minister of Great Britain, Mr. Cameron, came to Cairo and went to Tahrir Square, and with him was a delegation of arms companies. What a message to bring to the region. Because he was going to an arms bazaar in the region. What happened to traditional diplomacy? What happened to cultural diplomacy? What happened to scientific diplomacy? What happened to arms, A-L-M-S, not arms, A-R-M-S? What wealth we have, a Druze emir of Mount Lebanon once told a foreign visitor in the mid-19th century. What wealth we have, we spend on injuring one another. The Strategic Foresight Group estimates that between 1991 and 2010, constant war and conflict have cost the region $12 trillion in lost opportunities. That is to say, since Madrid and Oslo. It is within this context that we grumble about having to provide jobs for our young people. Assuming that each new job opportunity should require $30,000, it would cost $3 trillion over the next 9 years to find employment for each one of them. That does sound inconceivable. After all, it's almost a third of what we spend on arms. I suspect that as the oil runs out, unkempt youth may be the profoundest possibility that we have. I would be fascinated to learn, for instance, what Europe's demography looked like during the Age of Enlightenment, or America's during the post-war years. With this in mind, Richard Florida, the urban studies theorist who famously coined the phrase the creative class, recently published some findings in regard to the region which I hope will not go unnoticed. Broadly speaking, Florida contends that the creative socio-economic class have been the key driving force of economic development in all post-industrial cities. In particular, the United States of America. Writing in The Atlantic, he observed that the highest percentage of creative class workers are found in advanced economies, the Netherlands, Singapore, Australia, Scandinavia, Belgium, Germany, the UK, and Canada. But he also found that Egypt's creative class comprises roughly a third, 33.1% of its workforce, on a par with the United States, 34.8%. To put this statistic in context, in 2007, the World Intellectual Property Organization estimated that 11% of the USA's GDP derived from creative industries. How many countries in West Asia and North Africa do not collect or report data on their workforce categories? But they do collect data on the percentage of young adults engaged in tertiary education, which in turn bears a very large statistical correlation to the size of the creative class workforce. Florida found that several countries in the region, including Libya, marked highly on this index, and the tertiary enrollment figures in the West Bank, 38%, Jordan, 35%, were higher than they are in Hong Kong, 34%. Countries with high levels of human capital are usually among the richest in the world. But in our region, he observed that the standard of living was lower than the creative class, and human capital levels would seem to warrant. For him, this disconnect was a signal of unrealistic economic potential, a failure to translate talent, creativity, and ambition into economic development and well-being. These findings also explain why for the past few decades, West Asia, North Africa has exported less, invested in research and development less, and published less than almost any other region of the world. Potential has been suffocated. November 2009, the Irving Marion Kaufman Foundation discovered that since 1980, virtually all new job creation in the United States occurred in firms less than 5 years old. That is why I say we shouldn't be finding our young people jobs. We should be providing the tools for them to create their own. Having worked with Madeleine Albright on the International Commission for the Legal Empowerment of the Poor, I also think it's time to redefine the way we classify poverty. The poverty line shouldn't be defined solely by income to those who make $1 to $1.5 a day. It should begin to take into account the excluded of what Rahman Subhan calls structural injustice. Those with no access to opportunity, participation, or functioning institutions. As we've seen in Tunisia and Egypt, poverty is holistic. It is more than market-driven. There was a time when the destiny of our region was a one-way street sign posted peace process. Today, that street leads in all sorts of directions. The veils of hypocrisy, ignorance, and stagnation have shrouded West Asia, North Africa for far too long. Centuries of enlightenment have been forgotten. After all, was it not Muslim scholars who preserved the philosophy and science of Greece and Persia during Europe's Dark Age, or developed the Arabsky astrolabe, and charted the constellations centuries before your own Copernicus? It's time to renew the cosmic dance of dialogue and the noble art of conversation, which to my mind at least is not a martial art. The voices from West Asia and North Africa have become universalist in their rhetoric, global in their scope, and faithful to the lands from which they have emerged. I invite you to listen to them with my thanks.